Hi all, this is section 2.5, Elasticities of Demand. Here we'll be going through the basics of elasticities before we go a bit deeper in class. So, what is it? Price elasticity of demand is a measure of the responsiveness of quantity demanded of a good or service to a change in its price. We already know the law of demand, which of course is. What PED tells us is how much quantity demanded will change and why should we care. To measure the PED, how responsive demand is to a change in price, we do some simple maths. Percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. Let's put your skills to the test. Work out the PED for this demand curve when price increases by 20% and quantity demanded decreases by 5%. Okay, -5 over 20 is -0.5. You'll notice that I've put the negative in brackets here, as PED will always have a negative value due to the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Therefore, we can ignore the sign as it has no significance. This value represents inelastic demand. The change in QD is less than proportionally responsive to the change in price. Inelastic demand means it is insensitive. Demand is insensitive to a change in price. A value of less than 1 means demand is inelastic, as generally does the steep slope of the demand curve. This is what an inelastic demand curve will look like. Okay, another one to support your learning. Pause and work out the PED when price increases here by 10%. Okay, we should have got that. -40 over 10 equals -4, or 4 because we don't care about the bracket. So here demand is elastic. It's more than proportionally responsive to the change in price. We're very responsive. When PED is greater than 1, demand is elastic and is generally represented by the flatter demand curve. By knowing the shape of the inelastic and elastic demand curves, we can analyze the effects on total revenue. Total revenue is the quantity sold, so quantity, multiplied by the price each is sold at, P. Therefore, it can be shown by this large rectangle here. Right? Let's see what happens now when price rises to P1. When the price rises, less apples get bought, reducing quantity to Q1. So that says Q1 under there. What we can see here is that the green rectangle shows us the new revenue due to the high price. And this red rectangle is revenue that used to be earned but no longer is, as the quantity has reduced from Q to Q1. At a glance there, we can see that the total revenue has fallen when price has increased because the revenue foregone is so much bigger than the revenue gained there. Anytime you want to know if revenue will increase or decrease due to the change in price, just sketch out a demand curve and see what happens. You just have to know whether demand is elastic or inelastic. But what determines the price elasticity of a good or a service? That's what we'll get into now. So there are a number of determinants of PED. We'll go through each of these one by one, but to help you remember, we can use this acronym SPLAT to help us. So we've got different factors here. Remember, we'll go through each in depth. So substitutes, the number and closeness. How easy is it to switch consumption to a substitute? This is going to determine whether your good is elastic or inelastic, whether the demand for the good is elastic or inelastic. So let's look through some examples. Let's say you're interested in buying this car, a Hyundai i30. If the price goes up, do you have options? Yes. There are a number of close substitutes, such as the Ford Focus or Toyota Corolla. Consumption can easily be switched, meaning that demand may be relatively responsive or elastic to the price hike. Price of the Hyundai i30 goes up, demand will drop significantly because I can switch to a substitute, a close substitute. What about petrol? If petrol prices go up, what do you do? Sure, you could buy an electric car or get an LPG conversion for your car, but these are very expensive options. So while electricity and LPG are substitutes for petrol, they aren't really close substitutes. So you're going to buy petrol. The price of petrol goes up, you're going to buy petrol. This means that demand for petrol would be more inelastic. What about beef? It's red meat, it's a source of protein, but it's not the only thing that does that. You could eat one of these little guys, lamb, instead. Demand would be relatively elastic here because there is a close substitute. Now, next we have the proportion of income. Inexpensive goods that take up a small proportion of our income are often bought without considering the price, making them more inelastic. If we don't consider the price, then we're not responding to the price. Imagine a pencil. Let's say this costs 50 cents, right? If the price suddenly goes up to 55 cents, that's a 10% increase in price, but are we really going to buy fewer pencils because of that price increase? Same if price goes down to 45 cents. Are we going to buy significantly more pencils? Would we even notice? Would we even notice the price increase? So another example like this would be chewing gum. We don't care if the price changes too much, so we don't respond. We have inelastic demand. Goods which take up a large proportion of our income, however, are different. A 10% change in the price of a $20,000 car is significant. It's $2,000. So it would greatly affect our buying decisions. We will be more responsive to a change in price. Thus, we will consider demand to be elastic. It's a higher proportion of our income. That makes it more elastic. Smaller proportion, more inelastic. Next, we look at luxury, whether the good is a luxury or a necessity. So the less you need a good, the more you care about price, the more elastic demand is. The more necessary a good is, the more inelastic demand is. Quantity demanded won't fall much with an increase in price. So luxuries, which aren't necessary, e.g. jewelry, often have elastic demand. Now, I find this chart useful to work us through this idea. Food is necessary for life, so you'll pay what it takes to get food. Many consider meat necessary, but there are substitutes for it. You can eat vegetables. So it's not quite as inelastic as food in general. The different types of meat, again, closer substitutes to each other than they are to, say, vegetables. So again, they're becoming more elastic. Different types of chicken, closer substitutes again, and different types of chicken nuggets are almost perfect substitutes. So demand is therefore very elastic. Addiction. Addiction is really just the extreme of necessity. It can take a large increase in price to decrease the quantity demanded significantly. Think of things like cigarettes. Price keeps going up. We add taxes to cigarettes every year, yet smokers keep on buying them. In-app purchases, play-to-win games, and then of course illicit drugs like crack, where people are willing to steal or prostitute themselves just to pay the price that it takes. So they're not responsive to price at all, or hardly at all, inelastic demand. Lastly, the time that you have to make the decision. So the longer the passage of time, the more elastic demand becomes. An example will help us here. So electricity prices in South Australia have just about doubled in the past decade. When prices go up, people still need electricity, so they keep buying roughly the same amount. They still need it from the grid, from coal here, which is where a lot of ours comes from. So they still buy roughly the same amount. In the short term, demand is inelastic. It's insensitive to the change in price. It is only in the longer term that a substitute like solar panels actually becomes more feasible. These require a lot of upfront capital, thousands and thousands of dollars. So therefore, they're not it's not really a close substitute to grid electricity. It's a substitute, of course, but it's not that close. When looking at demand for electricity a few months after a price increase, it was inelastic. The demand was inelastic. People were buying pretty much the same amount of electricity from the grid as they were before. But when looking at demand for grid electricity a few years later after the price increase, it becomes much more elastic. The quantity demanded has decreased quite significantly. People have responded to that price increase. It's just taken them a bit of time. Okay, so I hope you've got some useful notes. We'll go through exercises in class to really embed these ideas.